Jessica Tsur, thank you for joining us. Anxiety, depression. At what age did that make its entry into your life?
I remember looking up at Hashem and I said, Hashem, you gave this to me. I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. I wouldn't wish this on anybody else. You gave it to me. Now at least help me take it and do something worthwhile with it.
Over 40 million Americans under the age of 18 suffer with anxiety.
I'll try not to get emotional, and I see 3 of my kids' eyes peeking out the window. There's like 10 police officers. And we've never had like a full-out conversation, but they watched their mother get into an ambulance. It was traumatizing for all of us. I spent my 40th birthday in a psychiatric hospital. It's a very degrading environment to be in. You're stripped of really your dignity. You're stripped of your clothing, you're stripped of your phone, you're stripped of shoelaces. If you're wearing a sweatshirt, any strings. It's self-talk language that will just say, you're not good enough. Your challenges are messing up everybody else's life. You're never going to get better. You're not feeling well. Why keep going?
You are probably one of the strongest women I've had the honor to meet. And I've met a lot of people sitting around this table. Hey, before we get into this, I want to ask you, and here's an opportunity for you to win $200 cash. You comment below on this video on YouTube. Where in the world are you watching this video from? Are you in Scotland? Are you in Florida? Are you in Brooklyn? Are you in Muncie? Are you in Lakewood? We want to know where our listeners, where our viewers are in the world. Drop it below, a comment where you're watching from, and one of you will be chosen to win $200 cash. Just like last week, we selected a winner. We will reply to your comment, and we will announce it on next week's episode. So go ahead, leave that comment, and good luck. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of the Meaningful People podcast. So happy you are here. This is a very important episode. It is sensitive episode. So anxiety, depression, things like that are mentioned. Suicide is mentioned in this episode. It is something that if it is not for you, just giving you a heads up right now. I was driving home after listening to this episode. I spoke to a friend of mine, Yoni Hallen, great guy. And I said, this is the episode. I just recorded an episode that might change hundreds and thousands of lives. And that is the episode with Jessica Tsur, opening up, being so vulnerable. And you're going to hear it all in this episode. As you heard in that trailer just a little bit, this episode is sponsored by my friends at Kollel Chabad. Every big moment in your life can have Kollel Chabad part of it. You know why? Your daughter's about to go on their first date. You open the Pushka app, donate a couple bucks. You're about to go into a big business meeting. Open the Pushka app, donate a couple bucks. You are about to get on that airplane and fly across the world. Go in the Pushka app, donate a couple bucks. Pushka.cc/meaningful. It is in the pocket of you. It is where you are everywhere you go. Pushka.cc/meaningful. Hit the link in the show notes below. Download that app and give tzedakah today. Of course, an episode about anxiety, depression, stuff like this. It is so important to mention our partnership with Serenity Center, a clinic in the Rockland County area, but telehealth that you can access all over the world. Serenity Center is a leading therapy clinic with top clinicians. Hit the link below in the show notes. It is a confidential WhatsApp line. If you need a therapist, if you know a friend that needs a therapist, send them this link and get them started today. This is the episode of Meaningful People Podcasts with Jessica Tsur. You are listening to the Meaningful People Podcast,
the podcast featuring our nation's most impactful, influential,
and meaningful people. Jessica Tsur, thank you for joining us. It's my understanding you grew up in New Hampshire.
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Isn't it nice there, by the way, in New Hampshire?
It's gorgeous there.
Like
especially now with all the leaves that are falling. It's beautiful. There's not a lot of people, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Not a lot of Jewish people.
Now that you moved out.
I would go back in a heartbeat if there's a Jewish community.
I need you a little closer to
Nachi's on it. Nachi's on it. Nachi's on the Jewish community in New Hampshire.
I'm in a Jewish community in Providence, which, by the way...
Well, I know the Chabad family knows you guys.
Where?
Rabbi Krinsky.
Rabbi Krinsky is the best.
That's how I became from.
No way.
Tell us about that. How'd you come from?
How did I become from? I was walking around my neighborhood and I saw a guy with a black hat who scared the heck out of me. And then I was doing nothing for a summer. My mother said, do you want to work at the Chabad camp? I said, what's the Chabad camp? And I started working there and I was in awe of these counselors that were like 5-6 years older than me, but like really in awe. Like it just was fascinating to me. And that was my first exposure. I was 12, 13. And that's how I started my religious journey, while eating bacon and ham for dinner.
Wow.
After working at Chabad.
Yeah.
Not like
During,
at the Chabad.
I mean, it was a journey.
And they weren't serving that at the
They
Chabad,
absolutely were
is what
not
I'm saying.
serving.
At what point do you drop the bacon and ham? I'm just curious. I never asked this to a Baal Tshuva. Is it the last thing? Is it the first thing?
No, it's the first thing.
Okay.
It's the first thing.
Full stop.
Yeah, for me it was. That was actually the first thing, and it was the easiest thing. Was the food.
So you grew up in New Hampshire. Tell us about living there. You say you go back there if you could right now.
I would go back there if there was a Jewish community. I would
Okay.
not go back there without the community.
And there's no Jewish community in New Hampshire?
Chabad, which is small and people are not,
Right.
Chabad attracts, a different type of community. It was, it's a beautiful place. I grew up in public school. I just grew up a regular, definitely not a 5 towns life,
Yeah.
There was no competition between clothing. It was very chill. There was no social pressure. You just kind of did your thing. I played with my
Right.
Cabbage Patch Kids, played in the leaves, played in the snow, shoveled the driveway.
Interesting. That's cool. So let's jump right into the thick of things.
It sounds like you really love that topic, Nachi.
What? Comparing clothing? Anxiety, depression. At what age did that make its entry into your life?
It made its way into my life very young, but it didn't have a name until I was in my 20s. That meaning it manifested, really I was born with it, but I remember it starting in like first grade. It manifested in physical symptoms, especially when there was a change. If we were ever going on a trip or there was a vacation, I would get severe stomach aches, headaches, nausea, dizziness, to the point that I would make my mother and scream at her when she didn't take me to the doctor, because I always believed that there was something really physically wrong with me. I also had a lot of social anxiety, so going to birthday parties, bat mitzvahs was either out of the question or it took a lot of energy and strength to get through it. But we had no idea. I was just that pain in the neck, oldest child who needed more attention, and none of us had a name for it.
And throughout, it seems like it's a lot of years from first grade to your 20s. What was the consequences of living with in such a way?
Unfortunately, you kind of just get used to it. I look back and I'm thankful that I have journal entries, not from when I was young, but in high school and in the beginning of college. It took a lot out of me. I had my 2 closest friends that I hung out with. I controlled it by getting good grades in school, doing extracurricular activities to keep my mind and my body busy and active. And I just got used to living with it, but it wasn't easy. But as I got older, the struggle got more real, more challenging, and to the point where that's when I needed help. Probably could have benefited from help when I was younger, but none of us knew.
Was this something that your parents, any of your siblings were able to pinpoint? Like,
it wasn't spoken about then, like it is today. There were, like now you hear the words with my kids, like anxiety, depression, mental health, it's flying everywhere. Then I never heard the word anxiety. And it's not like it's not in my family. My grandmother struggled with it from both sides. My mother struggles with it. Some of my sisters struggled with depression, anxiety. There was no public conversation about it.
Did you know that at a young age that it's something that they went through as well?
No, I did not. Not until I was in college and a young adult.
Wow.
People, as you were growing up, presumably weren't talking about it openly. And obviously the work that you're doing today is part of that solution, creating awareness around
Right.
the conditions and the tools to address them. I'm wondering, however, and maybe this was part of Nachi's question, but just to double click on it, were other people in your life aware that you were struggling with this thing, even if you weren't able to talk about it openly with people, but did they observe that you were struggling with this?
According to my mother, she says no. She feels tremendously guilty about it, but she still said she has no idea. Also, my own doctor, who I went to very often, if they were aware that there was a mental health challenge like anxiety, why would they have not suggested something? I just didn't feel. I had the weirdest aches and pains, and there was never a physical cause to it. But if the doctor didn't know any better, how were we supposed to know?
Mm-hmm.
So you're in your 20s. Take us through what led up to you finding out that what you're dealing with has a name.
So I enrolled in the University of New Hampshire, which I did freshman year, sophomore year, and junior year. I went to Hebrew University for a semester, came back and started feeling extremely dizzy. But like to the point that going to school, I had to hold on to my desk or whoever was next to me. I felt like I was on a boat. There was never like a steady feeling. And I lived like that for a year while going to neurologists and cardiologists. And I remember my mother taking me to like the boonies of New Hampshire, which are literally driving up brick roads, to a homeopathic doctor who prescribed, I don't even know what. Nothing was helping. I moved to the city from New Hampshire, which is a big deal with somebody who has anxiety, after I graduated. And that was the year of September 11th. And that was the year my grandmother passed away, but I still wasn't making any connections.
You moved to the city of Manhattan?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was with people that I had met at Hebrew University and I had become from. And so we all took an apartment together.
In 2001.
Is that when September 11th was?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was probably brutal for
So I wasn't even, again, if you said that to me now, how could I not put those two pieces? September 11th, I moved from a tiny town in New Hampshire to Manhattan, took a school in the Bronx, teaching in the Bronx. I barely knew how to get on the train and to the Bronx. All these pieces fit and make sense now, but they didn't then. Then I was just lying down in the middle of the day because I couldn't stand up. Not socializing with people because I really wasn't feeling well. It was just not physically not feeling well and not getting any answers from any medical doctors. And then it was actually one of my roommates who said, Jessica, you really need to go see a therapist. And I said, what is a therapist? Why are you telling me to do that? But I was so desperate to feel better that I didn't ask any questions. And I went and I saw the therapist twice who said, you need to go to a psychiatrist. They prescribed meds and it changed my life for a long time. 95% of the physical symptoms decreased or went away. I was able to go to the gym. I was able to be social, and it really changed my life.
Wow.
Until things came crashing down again.
So how many years was it good for? And then what happened when it came crashing down?
It was good for almost 18 years. Now, I'm not saying there were cycles of panic. I probably had panic attacks 4 times a year, but I didn't even really know that they were panic attacks. I never experienced depression until 8 years ago.
Can I pause you on the panic attack?
Sure.
I think part of our work here is to sort of create awareness around these terms.
Right.
That, as you mentioned before, this conversation has become commonplace more so over the last couple of years than it was. And on the one hand, it's fabulous. Mental health awareness, there's resources, there's tools, and that's amazing. But another outcome of it becoming part of common vernacular is that people use terms very flippantly and for things that aren't those 100%. Things. So what is a panic attack?
So the information that I'm giving you now, I still didn't know it was a panic attack. But what happened to me was I would have physical symptoms to the point that I would feel like I was going to die. And I would call either Hatzalah or 911 for help. It's very hard to pinpoint what those symptoms are. I felt like I was going to pass out and die literally at that moment. And if help didn't come soon, my life was going to be over. And it's just like you're surrounded by incredible, intense fear.
Wow.
I don't know if that clarifies a little bit.
That really does. So going through that, you said it was happening multiple times a year, but you said that like as if it was...
I just didn't know. I thought that something, again, even then, I didn't even know it was a panic attack. So Hatzalah would come, check my vitals, ask if I wanted to go to the hospital. By the time they got there, my vitals were, my heart rate slowed, everything slowed down. There was no need to really go to the hospital. So I didn't like myself for having to rely on Hatzalah and not even knowing what was going on, but it passed and then I was okay for a few months.
Okay. And I guess take us through the months and the days where things, took a turn for the worse. Yeah.
So it was 8 years ago. I've been running an at-home daycare for 2-year-olds for the last 14 years. In that time, we've moved 4 times and we had finally bought a house. And it was summertime. I was running a camp and we were doing dismissal outside. So lots of staff, 2-year-olds running around. And a woman approaches me with a clipboard. And I remember seeing her, my heart sank from my chest to my toes and I froze, like not able to move. I remember another parent coming out of the car and bringing me into the house because I literally couldn't move. And it was the state. Somebody had reported me and they were coming to shut down the daycare. So again, this would probably be a traumatic or challenging experience for most people, but my body from that day forward reacted as if it was a very traumatic event. And while I was taking the steps, I continued running my daycare. I started taking action to become legal. And while all this was happening, I started having panic attacks multiple times a day. Hatzalah was there very often. I was not able to eat. In a month and a half, I dropped 30 pounds. I couldn't eat more than a banana. And I called my first therapist from the ER. And I said, I need help. I don't know what kind of help I need, but I need help. And this was a therapist who specializes in panic disorder. I went to her for a few weeks, and the panic just kept spiraling and spiraling. And the panic then started leading into depression, which I had never experienced before. And, you know, we could talk more about what depression looks like. For every individual, it's different. The depression led to self-harming behaviors, and the self-harming behaviors led to very intense suicidal ideation.
So I guess let's start from that beginning. It seems like, you had something which was challenging that took place.
Right.
But do you know why your body reacted in such a way?
So it's such a hard question. You know, even today people will say, well, why are you having the panic? I don't know. It doesn't always work like that. Like if we could figure out what was causing it, it would be much easier to stop it.
You said in the beginning, it's just it was genetic. Like it was something that.
So there's definitely a genetic piece, but I think that genetics they can have a piece. It's not the whole picture.
Right.
Because I was struggling for years, but I never struggled like this. This event clearly did something to my nervous system that kind of just was like the tip of the iceberg and created the downward spiral. So I always say that was the starting point to my real challenges, but I don't really know. You know, it was probably a buildup of life experiences.
And that spiral, which, let's take it piece by piece. You mentioned depression, which was the first time you were experiencing that. What did that look like for you?
Again, it's so hard to explain because when you're in it, it's not like it's an emotional pain in the innermost depths of your soul. It was very hard. I felt like I had an elephant sitting on my chest, so it was very hard to get up and out of bed, very hard to get my kids off to school. My husband had to do it many mornings. And then it was a lot of negative self-talk because I was feeling this way and I didn't know why. And I didn't know why it was hard to get to work. I didn't know why I couldn't get in my car. I couldn't go to the grocery store. Everything was leading to panic. I started to hate myself and really resent myself. And it just puts you in this dark, clouded bubble that nobody could see on the outside. That was the hardest part for me, was that nobody had any clue what was going on inside of my own brain. Most days they still saw them over that showed up for work and hugged the kids. I run a clothing gemach in my community. I was still doing gemach hours. Usually there was dinner on the table. Sometimes it was cereal, but my kids still had what to eat. They still had clean clothes to wear. It's just the inner turmoil that was going on inside of my own brain.
And were you working with anybody or confiding in it with anybody what you were going through at the time?
So it was really only the therapist, and I was bounced from one therapist to the next because the panic therapist said, no, you need this, and this CBT said you need DBT. And this went on for 5 years until I spent my 40th birthday in a psychiatric hospital.
Wow. And that must have been a wake-up call.
I was hospitalized once before, which was voluntary. I knew that I wasn't okay and I needed help. I really hope that the majority of the people listening have never experienced a psychiatric hospital for themselves, because it's I understand why it's needed. It's needed to keep a person safe. As a frum woman, as a mom, as a teacher, it's a very degrading environment to be in. You're stripped of really your dignity. You're stripped of your clothing. You're stripped of your phone. You're stripped of shoelaces. If you're wearing a sweatshirt, any strings. And it's a very, very challenging environment to be in. I realize and understand why I was there. It's actually where my organization was born, so I'm very grateful for that. But it was challenging.
Well, what was, I guess, the things that led up in your life to you having to be checked in, which you said yourself, you needed to be there.
Right. So the first time I realized I did, I think what people don't understand is that this is an illness. And when you're struggling with depression, the words, and I'm not saying I'm hearing voices talking to me because I'm not, it's self-talk language that will just say, you're not good enough. Your challenges are messing up everybody else's life. You're never going to get better. You're not feeling well. Why keep going? And there's a therapy called IFS, which I'm now learning more of, which is internal family systems, that we're all made up of parts. And there is a part of me that's a fantastic Mora. And there is a part of me that is a phenomenal leader in the community. And there is also a part of me that struggles with a mental illness and battles with these invisible demons inside of my brain every single day of my life. And so I did not have the proper support that I needed. Again, that's why my organization was created. And that's why I believe I ended up in a hospital. If I had had the support, I do not think I would have hit crisis point.
How long were you there for?
5 days.
Do you remember those 5 days vividly?
I remember everything. I remember the movies that people were watching. I remember I'll tell you how and why the organization was started. I love exercise. For me, it's a big release. It's a coping skill. And when you're in a hospital, it's not, especially when you're in a psychiatric hospital, because you're not allowed in or out. And so I started pacing up and down the hallway. And while I was taking these walks, multiple times a day, there was another woman who was there who was also she was in a hospital gown, but she had a sitter in her hand. And I didn't want to be by myself. It's a very lonely place to be. So I went up and I introduced myself and I asked her if she wanted to join me taking these walks. It took time. I mean, it probably didn't take more than 2 days, which in a psych ward felt like an eternity. And eventually we walked very slowly and we started walking together. There wasn't much conversation, but it was still another person to be with. And later that evening, there was an African-American nurse who came up to me and she said, Bubala, I don't know what you're doing, but keep on doing it. And I kept you're in a psych ward, so you're in your head a lot. I'm like, I'm in a hospital struggling. Like, what am I doing? What is she telling me? And I realized that the power of connection is literally the answer to get through this illness. It's the power of somebody else first-handedly understanding your struggles and being with you every single part of the journey.
We'll be right back to this episode of the podcast, but a quick word for my friends at Tavito. Check out this video.
Tovito, walk down Mitzvah Boulevard, climb that mitzvah tree, dance with rabbits and tap, Asian MS solve the mystery, Bella Bracha and the Shpai mitzvahs we love to see, Robin's Nest and all the rest, there's only one place it's gonna be. Tovito, Tovito, come along to Torah Town, dance with YBC. Shmuel Kunda is telling stories. Hey look, it's Rabbi B. From Parsha and Egunim, there's always something new to see. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show at Tovito. Tovito, Tovito,
Tavito.com. Make sure to go ahead and use promo code MM10 for 10% off your subscription right now. That is MM10 for 10% off your subscription right now. Hey, before you move on, I want to tell you about my friends at Skive. Maybe you run a business and it comes with some complications running a team. So maybe you went ahead and got Monday.com or ClickUp, Asana, Slack, one of these things. And you said, yeah, this is a great software to use for my company, for my employees, but it's not really built for me. It's like shelf software. It is built for the world, but how do I make it for me? That's where Skive comes in. A team of people that can help customize the software that you purchase to make it just for you and your team. It's a lot cheaper and it's a lot easier than building your own software from scratch. That's where Skive is the team that you want to be using. Hit the link in the show notes below. Get in touch with the people at Skive today. If you run a business, if you run a team, these are the people you want in your corner. It's quick, it's easy, and it is successful. Now back to this episode. Because I want to really paint a picture for the listeners as much as possible. Is this place, before we get into obviously what led to the creation of your organization, is this place, this psych ward, a place where you voluntarily said that you're going to, you checked yourself in? Was it something that people around you said you need to go?
The first time, yes. The second time, no. The second time was by my therapist. She knew by what I was sharing that it was leading up to a place that could be dangerous.
And you mentioned the suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
That is something that I imagine either led to your stay into the psych.
That was the reason, yeah.
And during those times, how frightening was that for you?
You know, you're going through it. You're a little bit dissociated of what's really happening. You just know that you're feeling these big feelings, these big emotions, having intense urges. The second time was much scarier for me because I knew what being in a psych ward was like, and I wanted to avoid it at all costs. Unfortunately, in our community, and I think in most communities, there are no other choices. There's nowhere else to go. So in order to stay safe, that's why I ended up there, because that is literally what a psych ward. You're not gaining skills. You're not really doing therapy. You are being in, it's like a holding space until you're safe to leave.
Interesting. I feel like, I mean, who am I to speak about psych wards, but like, you know, they call it correction facilities where people go to, they're supposed to be, you know, corrected. They're supposed to learn behaviors and this. I feel like, I don't know, I had the impression that a psych ward is a place where you go and you develop certain, it's really just, it sounds like a holding place.
It is a holding place. It's not a temporary fix, meaning you have to leave. Most people leave a psych ward and go to an intensive outpatient program. That's where you're going to develop the skills. Yes,
that's where the rehabilitation
exactly
occurs.
So the psych ward is just like emergency.
It's an emergency solution. Now, yes, are there groups to go throughout the day? There are. In order to leave the psych ward, you have to show that you're putting an effort and show up at these groups. I would say the majority of the time, a psych ward is also for med stabilization.
To figure out what's going on.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you're going in without a diagnosis, sometimes you need a diagnosis to know how to treat it. If a medication is, you know, too little or too much, to make those adjustments and changes.
I imagine that evaluative process is pretty nuanced, right? Because it's probably fairly easy to speculate what they would like to hear you say in order to let you go.
Correct.
But the devil's in the details of actually evaluating, is the person actually there, or are they just paying lip service?
So again, you're talking about mental illness is such a broad spectrum. I mean, I know people that have gone in with psychosis. You can't, if you're having a psychotic episode, it's a psychotic episode. If you're, you know, struggling with schizophrenia, there are real signs and symptoms to see. Depression, anxiety, and even suicidal ideation. Again, I always tell people I'm not a mental health professional. I'm a professional living with mental health challenges. So was it easy to do what they wanted to see and hear to let me go? Absolutely. I also know that for myself, it wasn't a healing environment for me. Now, sometimes you need that break in the system so that when you go home, your urges and your emotions kind of come down a little bit. I never had med changes in the hospital. I even spent a month in a rehab facility in Arizona. My medication was never touched.
And it's my understanding that you have 5 kids at home, and this was, you know, what was that like, knowing that your kids are there and their mother is there?
So the second time I went to the hospital, I was in the middle of Gemach hours, and my therapist actually reached out to some of my friends and said, don't leave her alone. She's really struggling. It's not a good idea to leave her alone. And both me and my husband were so traumatized by the last hospitalization that my husband said, Jess, I'm putting a ladder, jump over the fence and run. Even as I share the story, like it's so mind-boggling. Like, what am I running away from? I felt as I was running, I'm like, what crime did I commit?
And where are you going?
I had friends. So I went to a friend's house.
Oh, so you jumped the fence?
I literally jumped the fence.
Oh.
I jumped over the neighbor's fence. I ran to a friend. I said, lock your door. Don't let anybody in. I'm hiding in your boiler room. And I hid in her boiler room for 45 minutes. Finally, I went upstairs to her guest room, tried to get to a calmer place. My friend said, my therapist had called Hatzalah. Once you don't go with Hatzalah, they then call 911. So my friends called and said, if you don't come home, they're sending out police and dogs. didn't have a choice. I walked home. This is at like 10:30 at night. I look up at my window. I will try not to get emotional. And I see 3 of my kids' eyes peeking out the window. There's like 10 police officers. And we've never had like a full out conversation, but they watched their mother get into an ambulance, and they were young. I mean, this is 7 years ago. It was traumatizing for all of us. It really was.
Honestly, it sounds heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking for them. Heartbreaking for me. I sat in the hallway of an ER for 15 hours before I was transferred into a hospital.
Why is that?
Because I was in the emergency department. In order to get transferred into the psychiatric unit, they have to have a bed that opens up. And so I sat, I made friends with the guys washing the walls. I wrote a lot. And also when you're struggling with suicidality, you have to have a one-on-one. So you're being watched for every single move that you make. Can't go to the bathroom alone. You can't even, I had to beg for a crayon because they won't give you a pen or a pencil. I'm telling you, I as I was writing, I said, no, like, hello, I have 5 kids. I've been teaching children for 15 years. The community relies on me for clothing. Where am I? Why am I not a human? I'm struggling. I'm in pain. I need to figure this out, but I'm still a person. I'm still a mother. I'm still a teacher. I'm still who I am. And I felt like a nobody.
I cannot fathom the pain and the baffling feeling of that scene that you just painted from every vantage point. Yourself in the midst of it, your children just
like having to
process,
having to run, hide. Like,
I imagine part of the impetus to create what you created was knowing that everyone in your life was experiencing this without any resources. Do you know, before you share what you did go on to build, do you know what your children did in those moments as they're at that window watching the ambulance pull out?
I don't know. And it's honestly too painful even to think about. My oldest was 10. My kids are now because I've started the organization, they see me helping and speaking to a lot of people. But it's very challenging to sit and have a real discussion, even with family members, even with children, that mommy's your mommy, I'm your Ima, and yet I still struggle very much with my mental health. I have an illness that you can't see, and I can't see, and nobody around me can see. Again, as my children get older, they'll tell me, Ima, you need to help. Like, my friend is having a panic attack. What do I do? Or if they're experiencing their own anxiety. But I am definitely guilty of not sharing and not communicating as best as I can as their mother.
Wow.
with them.
I do want to just take this moment and opportunity to commend you for taking all of this experience and all of this adversity and all of this challenge and channeling it to the work that you are doing today, because wow.
So I
cannot imagine the resilience and the strength that it takes to take all of this experience and to really channel it into spreading the light that you are doing.
I get that a lot. And the organization was born when I was sitting at LIJ, looking out the window, eating one of those Smucker's peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
No peppermint patties?
No peppermint patties. They didn't have. I was lucky I got a kosher peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I knew that if I didn't do something with this pain would kill me. And so I committed. I remember looking up at Hashem and I said, Hashem, you gave this to me. I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. I wouldn't wish this on anybody else. You gave it to me. Now at least help me take it and do something worthwhile with it. Like I said, please help me take my pain and turn it into some kind of purpose. And I'm grateful and I'm lucky, and I still struggle every day of my life, but thank God that's what I was able to do.
Before we're about to get to exactly what CATCH is, which is, it's an acronym for courageous, creating
a team of courage and hope.
Creating a team
of courage and hope.
What's the T?
Team.
Oh, I missed that. Okay. you just said that you may be guilty of not communicating with your kids as much as maybe you want to. This podcast right now is maybe something that they'll listen to, and it's an opportunity that you maybe have to say something and they will hear it. Is there something that you want to say that you want them to know what their mother thinks or feels?
You're going to make me cry.
I'm sorry. You almost made me cry, so.
You know, they'll see me sometimes more than others opening my medication bottle to take a Xanax if I need to bring my anxiety down. And they're kids. And my heart just wants to say, like, I will always be there. No matter how much I'm struggling, I will continue to reach out for help when I need the help. And I always tell my kids and I tell everybody else out there that acknowledging that you're struggling and acknowledging that you have a mental illness, which I really don't like the word mental illness, but that's what it is. Reaching out for help is a sign of strength. And I tell them all the time, like, we're not getting through life pain-free. None of us are. And if they learn anything, I want them to know that these challenges are nothing to be ashamed of. They're a struggle just like anybody else has a struggle. And it's what we do with our struggles that not only helps others, but helps ourselves as well. And I just hope they feel some sense of pride amongst the information that I'm sure as children is difficult to hear.
And I never met your children.
They're pretty awesome children.
I want them to know that you are probably one of the strongest women I've had the honor to meet. And I've met a lot of people sitting around this table. And they should know that about their mother.
Thank
to
you.
come here and do this, beyond just creating the organization, which you created, which we're going to talk about, but to be vulnerable, to come here and do this, which the whole Jewish world, God willing, is going to hear, is a, like Momo said, a shrecha. It's an unbelievable thing, and they should know and should never forget how strong their mother is.
Thank you so
that's
much.
what I want them to know. And I want to talk now a little bit about Catch. It's something that it seems like you realized in the psych ward that connecting with people might be in some way the antidote, right? Not anecdote, antidote. Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nailed it, Nachi.
Thank you.
No, of course.
It might be the antidote.
I didn't do anything in that scenario, by the way. You were
It
thinking.
was the eyes. So, tell me once you get out, what was the first step you took?
I have to tell you, as somebody that struggles with social anxiety, like tremendously, going to Simchas is hard for me. It's like this illness destroys me, yet it's also become my superpower. I've never reached out to an organization and said, I need to share my story because I know it will help so many other people. I have no idea how. Each time I speak, each time I write an article, each time I connect with a parent from Australia or from Passaic, I don't know how I have the strength to do this. And I reached out to Bikur Cholam. They were the first organization that I reached out to. And I said, I cannot be the only Jewish woman that's struggling with this challenge. It doesn't make sense. I'm not that unique. As much as I'd like to think I am, I'm really not. And so they said, let's do an event. You tell us what you want. Let's do it. And so we got Dr. David Palkovitz to come speak. I actually had a video created in my home. It was bought by another organization, but it was my story. And we showed that video at the event. And then I was speaking. The night before the event, one of the Bikur Cholam women called me and they said, Jessica, we've been thinking, we're really excited about this event. It's going to be really powerful, but maybe you should tell your story in third person, or maybe you should have somebody else read it. I said, I'm not going to be there if that's what you're doing, but you can call Dr. Palkovitz and ask his professional opinion with what he thinks. And he said, absolutely not. The only way to knock down the shame and the stigma is to speak these words, knock down these monsters out loud.
But they were trying to protect your...
They were trying to protect me and my family. Yeah.
And you said no.
I said no. There was something inside of me that just, again, you know what you have to be? Somebody has to be ashamed of if they have an illness and they're not helping themselves. But if you have something that you're struggling with and you're trying to do whatever's in your power to get better, that's something to be proud of, not to be ashamed of. So no, and I shared my story. That was one of our many events. It was the first one. We've had 2 that were co-ed. It was standing room only. We had to turn people away at the door.
Wow.
That must have been a very validating feeling.
Beyond. And that was, from that experience, I knew that this was one of my missions in life, that I just had to keep going.
It's really modeling it more than anything, right? Because the help that you're offering people is to own their condition,
Right.
and to exercise that strength that you mentioned to reach out for help. And by modeling that of owning it, it does require a tremendous, to Nachi's point, amount of vulnerability and a willingness to own it. But I think that it has empowered a lot of people to do that based on what you've modeled.
Right. And I always, I'm the person in a crowd of people to hide under the table. And yet over the past few years, I've kind of put myself in some sort of spotlight, and I'm doing that because I'm seeing the ripple effect of what it's doing for other people. Like, I had an article written last week, teenagers writing to me, they put together their own support group for Catch to Run. Why? One girl who's turning 16 said to me, I was falling apart before I read your article. I literally didn't know how I was going to make it to the next day. I just want you to know that you are changing the world.
Wow.
This was in Mishpacha, right?
This was from Bina.
Bina.
Yeah.
So
This
what was
Bina.
the...
And Yeshiva World News. I had an article in Bina it wasn't just me. We interviewed a bunch of people, and then I shared something in Yeshiva World News about how difficult it is to get through the Yontif season while struggling with anxiety and depression. This was it's not an article. I forgot what it's specifically called. It was over 138 people reached out. The most that's ever reached out to me.
Wow. I think we're going to top that with this episode. No?
I'm
Are you ready?
Hashem. I'm ready. I hope that everybody listening will be ready to join me in helping us to help all these other people.
Unfortunately, I mean, like, listen, I think, I don't know, recently or over the years, I work very closely with a therapy clinic, Serenity Center, Mordechai Weinberger.
Okay, yeah.
And we speak about the struggles that exist in the Frum community a lot.
Right.
And there's unfortunately there's episodes of psychosis, there's personality disorders, there's a whole bunch of anxiety that happens at a very young age. And I recently interviewed Rabbi Y.W. Jacobson, and like one of the biggest breakthroughs I think we had was he got on camera and he said that he suffered from anxiety.
I heard
he used to pull out his hair as a kid, and people were just like reaching out like, oh my gosh, you, Rabbi Jacobson? Like, you are, unbreakable.
That's what I think people don't realize. Like, I've had CEOs reach out to me. I've had doctors, psychologists themselves, Hatzalah members share that they too are struggling with these illnesses. You just can't, it's invisible. You literally can't see it. I mean, you could walk down Wall Street. You have no idea what is going on inside somebody else's brain. And the only way that we're going to be able to offer support is if we start speaking openly about this topic. I'm not saying that everybody should stand on the rooftops and share their stories. That's not what we're saying, but we're trying to create a space, and that's what our support groups do, so that people who are struggling can have those to turn to. It's a very, very lonely and isolating illness. And I believe, again, I'm not a professional, but just from my personal experience, that what can be dangerous and what can lead to those suicidal places is not having a place to turn.
I am very much looking forward to being at the TribeWorks Ignite annual event. December 11th, I will be joined by so many great people on stage. Chayla Kaufman, Cassie Akiva from the Daily Wire, Rabbi Shmuel Reichman, so many great personalities on stage to talk about starting and scaling a business or a nonprofit. I'm excited to be on a panel. I'm excited to meet all of you there. You have the opportunity right now to not only get tickets to be there, but to have your booth be there. It's an absolutely incredible networking opportunity. So go ahead, hit the link down below in the show notes. December 11th. I hope to see you there in Staten Island. Cannot wait. Just the last piece I want to tell you before we get back to this episode for the last time is Black Friday is right around the corner. And you know what time it is. It's time to go to townappliance.com, because why pay full price when you can get things at a great discount and you can get things with the best service? Well, Town Appliance has been doing that ever since 1979. Have you been born before 1979? Raise your hands. I don't think so. Maybe you were. Maybe you were. I don't know. Did you use Town Appliance? If not, here's your opportunity. Hit the link in the show notes of this episode. Get in touch with Town Appliance today and find out how they can make your appliance world a lot better. Now back to this episode. We recently interviewed Dr. Amy Barron from I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. And this is literally the point, what you're saying about the connection with people, having someone to talk to about what you're going through. And remember when we interviewed Malky Jacobs, she literally said, she's someone who went through a medical situation where she ended up losing her, parts of her arms and legs. And she literally said, had the community not been there for her, coming to visit her in the hospital, she doesn't think she would have survived.
Right.
She died, actually.
Yeah, she
And then
13
came
minutes,
back
she
to life.
flatlined. Yeah, it was 13 minutes, right?
26.
26 minutes?
Yeah, Yud Kei Vav Kei.
Yeah.
She was out for 26 minutes and then came back to life and did not regain vitality in her arms
You
and
gotta
legs.
clarify at what point you said you do.
She did.
I know.
She's awesome.
She's alive
She's
now.
alive
So
right
can
now.
I tell you what's frustrating? Not frustrating. Like that, it's a crazy story. But I just want to tell you, as somebody that lives with quote unquote mental illness, the community can see an illness like that. They can see a disease. They can see a challenge like that. If you look at me now, do you know that on Friday night of Second Days of Yontif, I had to text the hotline? You can't see it. And it's very hard, to raise funds for people to get support for something like this, because what are they looking at? There's just nothing to see. And I always try to explain that there is support for things like addiction and things like sexual trauma. And what we're trying to do is preventative, because we don't want someone to turn down an addiction path. We don't want someone drugging their emotions with alcohol and whatever else they're doing. We don't want people engaging in self-harm. Why are they doing that? Because there really is no return.
That's what Catch is hoping to be.
That's what Catch is. And
You want to catch it.
we want to catch it. We want to catch you before you fall.
Is that a phrase that
That's
you
what
use?
Rabbi Feiner says.
Love that.
That's amazing.
That's,
And it's
yeah.
also something that is so prevalent. Do you have any statistics?
I don't have them off the top of my head. I mean, the professionals that work with me
Right.
probably have those statistics. It's left and right. I mean, we all know somebody, either we struggle ourselves or we all know somebody that struggles.
Talk about it. You just mentioned Rabbi Feiner. If there's I guess I imagine you've met with a lot of therapists, and you mentioned Dr. David Palkowitz, who's an absolute legend. You've brought up
Also alive.
also alive,
Also alive. Living legend.
living legend. Yes.
Yes.
Rabbi Feiner, for example, you brought up your conversations with Rabbanim and therapists about this. What is the sentiment they've shared?
It's a tricky answer, because it hasn't been easy. I have a woman on my board. I'd like to give her a shout out. Her name is Sashi Hirth. She's been a very big, influential part of Catch.
From Five Towns?
From Rockaway.
Earth?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
And she always makes it her achrayus to reach out to the Rabbanim and the Rebbitzins every time we have an event. We just had an event about a month ago, a suicide prevention awareness event. We don't always get a response. And even with the professionals, the therapists themselves, they know that it's a need, but we're not getting the support that I think is so necessary in our endeavor. Therapy itself is unaffordable for most people. For a very few selection of people, they can afford it. And even when they can, 45 minutes once a week is 45 minutes once a week. When you're living with an illness that attacks your brain, you need a lot more support than that. So I've tried to reach out to Rabbanim and professionals and community members to get them on board. Obviously, I'm very passionate about this because I live with it. It's been a very big challenge.
You mentioned Rabbi Feiner. It seems like tell us about that.
So Rabbi Feiner we had an event in the White Shul. He's a tremendous support of what we do. He knows that it's needed in the community. I mean, there's no rabbi that doesn't have to deal with people's emotional and mental health struggles for whatever reason, diagnosis, financial struggles, marital struggles, you name it. These things affect people's mental health. And he has just backed us and every single step of the way.
And that's crucial probably to what you're doing.
It's absolutely crucial. We need more, but we'll take, Rabbi Feiner has really just been an incredible support.
Right. I think that the needle has moved tremendously over the years, probably since from before you started Catch to now. I mean, like the conversations are out there. We have a billboard currently up in Lakewood, Meaningful Minute Pause. We partner with Serenity Center.
Right.
We have a billboard up in Lakewood right now that reads, you are not alone, in big words. And it has a subtext of over 40 million Americans under the age of 18 suffer with anxiety.
Wow.
And a big shout out to the Lakewood Scoop, who he owns these billboards.
Wow.
For a
Good
long
for you,
time.
by the way.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just to bring that awareness, and people see it every day. They're driving, they see that, and it's just to tell people, you're not alone.
So it's interesting that you say that, because those 3 words sometimes get under my skin.
Which one? The 4 words?
You are not alone. Or those are 4 words. You are not alone.
It's like
it is 4 words.
It's the contraction.
Well, it's better because I was about to say 5 because all alone.
YOU''RE. I got you. It's 3 words.
Well, I was saying 5, so I'm wrong in any scenario.
Okay, none of us can count. And I just want to explain why. Again, this is an illness. So Friday night, second days of Yontif, I woke up at 1:00 in the morning with a horrific panic attack. The world is sleeping. It's Chag. There's no one to reach out to. My kids don't really know this, but
they do now.
They do now. This was the reality of it. I actually texted 2 Hatzalah members knowing they weren't going to respond to me, but I was desperate.
Hatzalah's always up. They for sure responded. They're always up.
Yeah, but they don't respond to text.
Shout out Yoni Hallen, Zevi Spielman, Shimmy Canner, Gutman, Ari Leibidel. The best Hatzalah members are numero uno Belsky, whoever else is out there. These guys are the best.
They're amazing, and they've showed at my house multiple times, but they're not responding to my text message.
Yeah, they shouldn't.
Okay.
Not a Yontif.
Exactly. So I walked downstairs.
What are they going to say? Sup? Like, yeah, no, they can't do
that.
I
reached out with a specific.
Oh, yeah, no, okay.
I mean, I have whatever.
Yeah, go on.
Anyways, I walked down the stairs. I sat down on my couch looking at my candles, and those words flashed through my mind. You are not alone. But guess what? At that moment, I was alone. I was extremely alone. I was scared.
You felt alone. Yeah.
And I needed help. So what did I do? I texted somebody else who understands these struggles and who literally supported and validated me for 2 hours by text and got me through the night.
Wow. Close friend of mine shared with me a line from, I think it was Moshe Gersht.
Yeah. He shared with you the line that you were on the hosting the podcast?
No. He didn't say it on the podcast. He wrote it in one of his books.
Yeah.
Feelings are real, but they are not reality. So that reality of you not being alone, that's true, but it also felt in that moment real.
Correct.
That you are alone.
Correct. I mean, I know firsthand how many others are struggling with it. But at that moment, in order to get me healthily through that moment, I needed the connection of somebody who understood what I was going through.
And the next day, you're yourself. You're in shul.
I got up to hear my son read. My son read from on Simchas Torah.
Oh,
and
nice. Bar mitzvah?
No, he's actually, my husband's Yemenite, so they lane from when they're like 3 years old on Simchas Torah.
That's cool.
It's pretty cool.
Serious? Okay.
And yes, I usually don't wake up early. I was there in shul at 9:00 in the morning
to hear him lane.
Yet just a few hours before, I was texting for help.
Wow.
And that's also just the duality of this illness, that you can be really not okay in 1 minute and struggling, and yet a few minutes later, you can be okay.
That's how prevalent do you think it is, specifically what you went through? I have a feeling you might know. I mean, like I know during COVID, there was a psak from Rav David Cohn that anyone who needed to has a heter to call up Amudim, which they had a 24/7 hotline at that time, to call up if they are in need of mental health, help.
Right.
How prevalent do you think it is? How many households are there where there is that mother on a Friday night or a Yontif that is having to turn to that?
It's a hard question. I've definitely, the question is how many are actually admitting that they're struggling to that level?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's the
guess.
ones that reach out. Do I think that it's, you know, rampant? No, I definitely think there are. I think that there are also more teenagers that are struggling. I had a mother call me last week of her daughter who is she called her a good from girl struggling with self-harm and was asking me like who she can turn to ask if her daughter could use her phone to listen to music. I said, I'm telling you right now, most Rabbanim are going to give you an absolute yes, that our religion is so beautiful. And for those of us that struggle, it's a fear always like God is going to hate me. We're going to Gehenna. We're breaking Yontif. It's a real feeling of guilt that we struggle with. But people do struggle. I don't know how prevalent it is. Not to that extent. I'm not saying their anxiety and depression is rampant.
Right.
To that degree, I'm really not sure.
It was prevalent enough for Rav David Cohen to put out a video. Like we know Rav
Right.
David Cohen. Like he put out a video during COVID of a psak.
COVID was also a real time of pure isolation. And like I said, again, that's what I believe leads a person down those dangerous
It's the
paths.
isolation.
Right. And we were all isolated.
Talk to me about
It is important, I think, to close that segment with encouraging anyone that does need a psak to
reach out.
seek that out.
And there are, and we're working on putting this on our website, there are certain Rabbanim, and I have a whole list of them, that will give that psak for anybody that's struggling for their mental health. So
Yeah.
those resources are out there.
I want to talk a little bit about the teenagers that have been reaching out to you. Is that something you think is new? That it's just the world that we live in today. It's just the way it is. And how do you approach that?
So we actually tried to have a teen event. It was not so successful. We had 3 or 4 teens that showed up.
I mean, it's tough.
It's tough. It's very tough. And the teen, there haven't been a large amount of teens, but even to me, 5 to 8 teens that are reaching out, the courage that it takes them, not only are they reaching out, their parents have been next to them. They'll be texting me, oh, my mom wants to know your last name. It's so courageous to me that these teens can actually take that step and reach out. And what I think where I come in is I'm not a social worker. I don't have the same boundaries that professionals have. I can share of myself in a way that connects to these teenagers. They see I'm married. Like, I always say, what are we scared of? Like, why is there so much shame in our community, right? Why are we not talking about this? If you're single, you're scared you're not going to get married. And if you're married, you're scared that your children are not going to get married. So nobody wants to talk about anything because we all have
It's
this.
very marriage related.
Yeah.
But it seems to be. It really does seem to be. What else are we ashamed of? What are we hiding? Like if we're scared to share our struggles, there's got to be a reason that we're scared to share. We're scared of some outcome. So I believe that the more we see real people, I am a mom, I do have children, I do teach, I do community work. And these teenagers are saying, hey, wait a second. If she's struggling and she's still successful in what she does, I can be too. And it's okay to take that step to reach out. It's okay to share my story. It's okay to connect with someone else. I don't have to get through this alone. Teenagers go through enough of their hardships with the hormones. It's a hard world for these teenagers to live in. And so if I can provide that for them and to help them know that they're really not alone in what they're going through, and together we can create these safe, confidential, and validating atmospheres for them to connect and hold each other up, it's life-changing. Mm-hmm. It's really life-changing.
I love what you said before, and it relates to this point, that it takes a tremendous amount of strength to reach out for help. And it reminded me, I didn't want to interrupt you then, but you're reiterating the point, so I think I can share with you that I saw a very powerful exercise once where it took a bunch of people and blindfolded them.
Right.
And placed them into a very intricate maze. And the goal for all the participants was to get out of the maze. And they were offered one resource, which is one of the staff members was there, and all the person has to do is raise their hand, and the staff member would come over, and you can ask the staff member any question, any clues, any hints. Like, the world is your oyster. You can ask literally the staff member any question that you'd like. But the one stipulation was that you had to whisper the question to the staff member so no one else can overhear your question.
Gotcha.
And it would take sometimes hours for the people to get out of the maze. And you're watching this, so you don't know what they're asking. It's a very powerful, and like slowly but surely they get one question and they make it out. And then like one person's asking one question, another question, another question, another question. And then finally the big reveal at the end is, what is that one question that the blindfolded person needs to ask the staff member to get out of the maze? It's, can you just guide me out of here? Can you help me get out? And that is the one question that would get everyone out of the maze. And watching people go through that process of figuring out what is that one question. Because when you're blindfolded and you're isolated and you can't see out of this maze, you don't know what to ask. And all you need to do is ask for help.
That was extremely powerful, and it's so true. And I don't believe, at least for me, that there's always a way out of this illness. That for some, they're lucky to take medication and everything goes away. But for many of us that struggle, we have to radically accept that this is going to be something that we're going to have to live with for a very long time. And just like you said, I don't like to look at it anymore as a way out, but as a way through. Mm-hmm. And the way through is by asking for help, whether it's a professional or a family member or a friend. You're going to get stuck in that maze if you can't figure out how to ask for help. So,
how can people reach out to Catch to ask for help?
So we have our website is in the midst of being improved, but our email is info@catchsupport.org, and my cell phone number, which actually does go to me directly. And I haven't changed it yet because I want to be there as much as I can to support people. And if I can't at that moment, I will answer them and tell them we'll set up a time to talk. Or if I do speak to them and I'm not able to help, I will direct them to the right person. I will not leave them hanging.
Jessica Tsur, thank you so much for sharing your story and for the work you're doing. Wishing you much atzlacha.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of the podcast. Jessica was quite vulnerable, and we thank her for that. Of course, her organization is incredible, Catch. It is doing so much for the mental health world, for people who are in need of help, whether they're 12 years old or 90 years old, honestly. It's really, really amazing what she's been able to accomplish. Hit the link down below in the show notes and help them out. They're doing amazing work, and they cannot continue without your help. So make sure to show some love to what Jessica is doing. If you want to get involved, you go reach out to her. We'll drop some contact info as well. Anyways, if you know of a friend, if you know someone that could benefit from hearing or watching this episode, don't be stingy. Share this with them. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on YouTube, it's on the Meaningful Minute app, it's on 24/6. So go ahead. Sharing is caring. I hope to see you guys next week with another episode of the podcast. Until then, stay safe. Adios, amigos.